Internet keeps going. And we are live! Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Mishnah Mastery! Well, hey, with our flickering frequency screen, here we go. We're going to be doing, okay. Can you hear us though, Richard?
You know you haven't got the text on the screen, don't you?
I haven't put it on the screen yet, that's why.
That's
As
why.
long as Richard can hear us, we're good to go. Sorry for the flickering frequency. I'm in a different room. But here we go. We're going to be doing chapters 3 and 4, and we're going to get the words up on the screen. Never fear. There you go. Now you can see chapter 3. And here we go. We are going to be talking about leaving items with different types of showroom, different types of people, different types of guards. So there's actually 4 different types of arrangements that you could make for depositing items with other people. So there is such a thing as a shomer chinam, which is an unpaid guard. That's basically where you say to your mate, here, could you look after this for me? And so there's going to be different halachic ramifications if the item gets lost or stolen or something happens to it, depending on whether you are negligent or not, etc., etc. So those are the different halachic ramifications that can come about on account of these 4 different types. So the 4 are a shomer chinam, someone who looks after an item without compensation; shomer sachar, which is a hired guard; a shoel, which is someone who you've borrowed an item from, so it's now in your possession; and a socher, which is somebody who is hiring or renting an item. So Mishnah Aleph is going to start by discussing a shomer chinam, someone who agrees to watch an item for free. And what we're going to see is that the person is responsible if they were negligent. They're going to have to cover the cost of the item, but not if something happened that was beyond their control, not if they were an onus, or if it got stolen, or if it got lost. However, he has to swear an oath if it was stolen, lost, or onus, so that he can avoid compensation. And if he refuses to swear, then he is going to have to foot the bill. He's going to have to pay up. So you might remember that there are instances where a person might have to pay double the value of the item, such as if someone had stolen something from someone else. So we've got to try and keep a lot of things balancing, a lot of plates spinning as we delve into this chapter. So here we go. Chapter 3, Mishnah Aleph. Hamafkid etzel chavero behema or kalim. In a case of someone who leaves an animal or a vessel with their friend to look after, right? So it's a shomer chinam, someone who is doing this unpaid. Venignavu or she'avdu, beyond their control, it was stolen or it got lost. So the Mishnah says, shileim v'lo ratza lishava. So if the guy pays the owner the value of the deposit, the items that had been left with him, and did not wish to swear an oath to his negligence, then Shahari Oru Shomer Chinam Nishba V'yotze. I don't know if that's the wording that you've got on the screen. Yeah, it is. For we say that a Shomer Chinam, an unpaid guard, should swear and then is released from having to pay anything. Nimtza Haganav, if the thief is later found, the Meshalem Tashlumi Chefel, then the thief is going to have to pay twice the amount for stealing the item. But the question is, who is going to get the money? And we'll see that in a second. Tovach umachar. If the guy who'd stolen it slaughters the animal and then sold it on, Meshalem Tashlume Arba v'chamisha, he's going to pay 4 or 5 times the amount, depending on what kind of animal it was. But now the Mishnah asks, Lemi Meshalem, who is he going to pay? Is he going to pay the original owner, or is he going to pay the person who is looking after the item? So the Mishnah says, Lemi she pikadon etzla, It's to the guard who it was deposited by. That's who is going to get the payments from the thief. He's going to be paying the person who had the item in his possession when it got stolen, which is a very interesting thing, that it wouldn't go to the original owner. Nishba v'lo ratza l'shalem. If the shomer was to swear an oath, v'lo ratza l'shalem, and did not wish to pay for the fact that this item has got lost under his watch, nimtza ganav, then when the thief gets found, mishalim tashlumei chefel, is going to pay the double payment. Tavachu machar, if he slaughtered it and sold it, mishalim tashlumei arba v'chamisha, and the mi mishalim. And so in that instance, then who is going to receive the money? The answer is levala pikadon. It's going to go to the original owner, not to the person who was looking after the item. Mishnah base, we're going to be dealing with someone who hires an item and someone who borrows an item. So if a person is hiring or renting an item, so he's paying for the usage of that item. So there's a machlokes as to whether then he's considered to be an unpaid guard without the responsibility, or whether he is like a paid guard who is being paid to watch the item and therefore must pay if it gets stolen or lost, but not if it was beyond his control. So Mishnah says, "Hasocher para mechavero v'ish'ila la'acher." The person hires a cow from someone, and then lends it to another person. So you are a socher, and the person that you've lent it to is a shoel. But umeisa kadarka, and the cow dies from natural causes. So the Mishnah says, "Yishava hasocher shemeisa kadarka." The socher, the person who was renting the animal, hiring the animal, has to swear an oath that it died by natural causes. Vashoel yishalem l'soicher, and then the shoel, who is actually responsible, a person who borrows an item and is responsible for things that happen to it beyond his control, the person who has borrowed the item is going to pay the socher, even though it died of natural causes. And the reason for that is because when the guy rented the animal, he had permission to do what he wanted, which included lending it to others. So if he lends it to somebody to borrow, and then the animal drops dead while it's in that person's possession, so according to the first position in the Mishnah, the person who is hiring the animal is going to get money. Says the Mishnah, though, Amar Rabbi Yossi challenges this and says, how could it be that this guy is going to profit from the original owner's cow? Rather, the value of the cow is going to be making its way back to the original owner. It can't be that someone who hires an item is going to be making money out of the situation. Mishnah Gimel. And this is a very rare Mishnah, because in this Mishnah we're going to be talking about someone who's very, very frum. Why is he very frum? Because he's going to go above and beyond to try and make sure that people get money. And so we're dealing with a situation where, says the Mishnah, Amar l'shnayim, a person says to two people, Gazalti le'echad mikem mana, I stole 100 quid from one of you, ve'eni yodeh eza mikem, but I'm not entirely sure which one of you it is that I robbed. Or aviv shel echad mikem hivkid li maneh, or one of your fathers left 100 quid with me, ve'eni yodeh ezahu, but I can't remember which of your fathers it was. So Al pi halacha, according to the strict letter of the law, all he has to do is give 100 quid to the Beis Din, and then the Beis Din can go ahead and figure out who the money should go to. But says the Mishnah, he ends up giving 100 to each of the people, so he's now giving away more than he had either robbed or had deposited with him. But because he's trying to be extra frum, as it were, he gives 100 quid to each of the possible parties that he either stole from or who had deposited money with him. But as we go into Mishnah Gimel, we're back into normal people. And the case in this Mishnah is Shnaim she'ifkidu eitzel echad. You've got two people who have deposited money with one individual. Ze maneh ve'ze masayim. One gave 100 quid, one gave 200 quid. Ze omer sheli masayim ve'ze omer sheli masayim. So they both claim that they gave 200 quid. So the guy can't remember which one of the two individuals had given him 200 quid. They both definitely gave him 100, and they're agreeing to 100 being owed back to them. The question is what to do with that remaining 100. So the Mishnah says, "Nosen lazeh maneh ve'lazeh maneh." Each one is going to get 100. V'ashar yehei munach ad sheyavo Eliyahu, and the final 100 is going to be left aside until Eliyahu Hanavi comes in the time of Mashiach to determine who it is that's the rightful recipient, or until the liar comes forward and confesses to him having been the one to only give 100. Amar Rabbi Yossi, however, Rabbi Yossi says, "In Cain, ma hifsid haramai." What does the cheater get? What does he lose here? He's lost nothing. So there's no incentive for him to admit the truth. So Rabbi Yossi has a very strict opinion. He says that really we should put everything aside and no one should get any money until the people are willing to come clean. Mishnah Hay, we are dealing with a similar kind of case, but we're dealing with items, vessels, rather than money. So the Mishnah says, similarly, when it comes to people giving two vessels, echad yafe maneh ve'echad yafe elef zuz. One was worth 100 quid and one was worth 1,000 quid. Ze omer yafe sheli ve'ze omer yafe sheli. They both claim that the more expensive one is belonging to them. So no seines akatan le'echad mehem, he gives the small, cheaper one to one of the individuals. And then you basically sell the more expensive item and then give 100 quid to the other person. And then the rest is going to go to Eliyahu, is going to wait until Eliyahu comes to rule. Amar Rabbi Yossi, same thing. Rabbi Yossi says, "In Cain ma'ifsid haramai." What does the cheater lose out by doing this? Rather, the entire value of the item is going to be left aside for Eliyahu Hanavi to come and determine, or for the liar to come forward and admit his guilt. Mishnah Vav, Hamafkid Peiros Eitzel Chaver, a person who leaves fruit with someone else. So the unique propensity about fruit or food, grain, is that it's going to rot and diminish in value. It's going to decompose. So the Mishnah says, Afilu hein avudim lo yigabahem. So the Mishnah says that if you've deposited food, fruits, produce with another person, so even if it's going to spoil, the guy should not touch it because it does not belong to him. So the person who gave it to you would rather his stuff rot than you sell it than give him the value, according to the first position in the Mishnah. But comes along Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, Mochon bifnei beis din, because the value is constantly diminishing, you should sell it in front of beis din so that they can value it. Because by doing so, it's like he's returning a lost item, because otherwise this money is just going to go to waste. And so Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says that's what you should do. Mishnah Zion. So the Mishnah says, Hamafkid Peiros Eitzel Chaver, a person who leaves produce with his friend. The person that's looking after the item can deduct what does it mean? So if you deposit produce with someone and then that person is going to give you back different produce in return, so the person who's looking after the items can deduct from the produce that he returns an amount that would be equal to the standard decrease of the produce, meaning that some things are going to rot, some things are going to decompose, some things might get lost to rodents and things like that. So there's going to be a decrease in value for sure on account of the fact that he is looking after the produce. And so that can be factored into the amount that the person who's looking after the items gives back to the original owner. And there's a specific way of calculating this. So the Mishnah says, Lechitin al-oraz, when it comes to calculating this for wheat and rice, the Mishnah says, Tisha chatzoi kabin lekor. You give 9.5 kav per core, or the guy loses out, the original guy loses out 9.5 kav per core. So let's try and work this out. A core is worth 180 kav. A core is worth 180 kav, and it's also worth 30 sa'ah, and 1 sa'ah is worth 6 kav. So when we say that you give 9.5 kabin for every core, you're basically saying, tisha chatzei, 9 halves, you're basically saying 4.5 kav per core, which means 4.5 out of 180 kabin, the original owner is going to have deducted from the amount of stuff that he gets back. Continues the Mishnah, Lisorin uladoichan, when it comes to barley and millet, tisha kabin lekor, it's going to be 9 whole kabin per core, which is 1/20th. That's 9 out of 180. So that's 1/20th that's going to be deducted for barley and for millet. Says the Mishnah, Lakusmin ulazerapish tan, for spelt and for flax. Mishnah says shalosh se'im lekor. That's going to be 10% for every core is going to end up being deducted. Hakol lefi mida, it's all based on how much there is, and hakol lefi zman, and it's also going to be assessed by how much time the items have been left in the possession. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, "V'chima ichpat lahen lachbarim." He says, what difference does it make to the mice how much is being looked after? Are they not going to be working their way through the produce, whether it's a lot or a little bit? Meaning, we've said that it's a certain amount for every core, but if there were multiple cores, it's not going to mean that the mice are going to eat any more. So then it should be a fixed amount, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So it shouldn't be a percentage, it should be a fixed amount for one core, and after that, everything should go back to the original owner. So he says, so you should only deduct from the first core, and so everything else is going to go back to the original owner. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, if it was a huge amount that had been deposited, then the guy shouldn't decrease at all, because if it's a tremendous amount of grain that you're giving, it's going to get bloated from moisture. And so even if some gets eaten, there's still going to be an enormous amount of volume that's going back to the original owner. And so therefore, he's going to be returning the same amount as was given. Mishnah Ches. What about when it comes to wine and oil? How much is going to get deducted? So the Mishnah says, Yotzi lo shasus leyayin. He should deduct 1/6 of the amount for wine. And that's because some of the wine is going to get absorbed into the walls of the barrel, and some of the sediments are going to sink to the bottom. So the 1/6 is to compensate for... I'm literally teaching online and recording right now. Can you please go to bed? I'll deal with it. So just don't talk to them, please go to bed. Millions of people now know that Miri told you that you've got a big butt. So Rich is completely zoned out. He didn't catch that at all. So you deduct 1/6 to compensate for wine that will have been absorbed into the sides of the barrel, and the sediments which will have fallen to the bottom. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Chomesh. Rabbi Yehuda says that you deduct 1/5, you deduct 20%. Yotzi lo shloshes lugin shemen lemeya. You deduct 3 lugin of oil for every 100 logs. That's 3%. Log umechetza shmarim, 1.5 log gets deducted because of sediment settling, and log umechetza bala, and 1.5 login, which will have been absorbed into the sides of the barrel. Im haya shemen mezukak. However, if it was a very refined oil such that there would be no sediments, eina motzi lo shmarim, then you don't deduct your sediment. Im hayu kankanim yishanim, and if they were old barrels such that previous oil will have already been absorbed into them, then eina motzi lo bala, then you wouldn't deduct anything for absorption. Rabbi Yehuda Omer afamocha shemen mezukak lechaveru kol yimos hashana harei ze mekabel alav lo gemechetz shmarim lemeya. Rabbi Yehuda says that even if it's a case where you're selling refined oil to someone else during the year, at any point in the year, then the buyer is going to accept upon himself to lose 1.5 logs for sediment for 100 log, as that is a standard measure of sediment. I guess it's an acceptable proportion that's going to get lost to the sediments, even as a very, very refined type of oil. Mishnah tests. Mishnah tests. We're going to be presupposing here that as soon as a shomer takes the item for himself, so he gets deposited with him, and then he wants to take it for himself, then he is going to qualify, he's going to become a gazan, he's going to be a thief. And so therefore, as a thief, he's going to owe money back, even if something happens to the item beyond his control. But if he puts it back into a protected place, into a good place for it to be looked after, and there's no negligence, then he's going to become a shomer chinam, again, an unpaid guard. So the Mishnah says, "Hamafkid chavis etzel chavera." Person deposits a barrel with his friend, v'lo yichadu la'abal in makom, and he doesn't specify a particular place that it has to be stored. So v'tiltala v'nishbara, and so the guy is moving it around, trying to find a place for it to be or whatever, and it breaks as a result. Im mitoch yado nishbara, if it fell from his hand, so if the breakage happened because of he wasn't being careful while he was moving it, so the Mishnah says as follows: Let sarko chayav. If he was moving it for his own purposes, then he's going to be liable for the damage. But let sarka patur. But if he was moving it to try and protect the barrel, then he's going to be exempt from having to pay. Once he's put it down and left it in a good place, if it gets broken, then the Mishnah says, Bein letzarka, bein letzarka, patur. Then whether it broke, whether he moved it for its own purposes or whether he initially moved it for the barrel's purposes, nonetheless, patur, he's going to be exempt. Yichadu la'abal in makom. If the owner came to your house and said, okay, you've got this cupboard, we're going to put it in the cupboard, and that way it's going to be protected, it's going to be safe. And the Mishnah says, v'tiltala v'nishbar, and as you were moving it in, it broke. Bein mitoch yado, bein mishinicha, whether it happened on account while you were moving it, or whether it's while it had been put down, the Mishnah says, l'tzarko chayav. If you're moving it for your sake, then it's going to be a chiyuv on you to pay sarka, and if it was for the sake of the barrel, because it wasn't protected where the owner had said it should be, then patur, you're going to be exempt. Mishnah Yud. A shomer can be considered negligent if he doesn't look after the item properly. So the Mishnah says, "Hamafkid ma'os etzel chaver." A person leaves money with his friend. Saran v'shilan la'acharav. If he bound it up and he slung it over his shoulder, or shemsaran livnov libito haktanim, or he gave it to his tiny little children to look after, which is very irresponsible. V'nol b'fneim shelo ra'oi, or he locked them insufficiently, then the Mishnah says chayav, you're going to have to pay back. Shelo shama kaderech hashom, because you haven't looked after it in an acceptable way, you've been negligent. V'im shama kaderech hashom in pater, but if you did look after it properly and it's still got lost or damaged, then pater, you're going to be exempt. Mishnah Yud Aleph, we're going to be differentiating between an unpaid guard, a paid guard, and someone who's just borrowing an item. So the Mishnah says, Hamafkid Maritz itself shulchani. If you deposit money with a money changer. So normally if you give something for protection, they shouldn't use it. But the issue here is that if you're giving it to a money changer to look after, there's a presumption that to you. So the Mishnah says in Sarurin, if it had been carefully bound up so you did not want the money changer to use it, then lo yishtamesh bahem. Then the guy should not use it. And and therefore, if it got damaged, he is not going to be responsible if it gets lost. If mutarin, if you gave this money in loose, then yishtamish ben, then there's an assumption that he's going to be using it, in which case, and therefore if it got lost, then it is going to be his responsibility. Eitzer balabais, if you gave the money to an ordinary guy, bein sarurin uvein mutarin, whether it was bound up or whether it was loose, lo yishtamish ben, then he should not use the item. And therefore, if it gets lost, he bears no responsibility for it. Chenvani kavalabais, a shopkeeper is going to be deemed like a balabais, like a regular guy. Divrei Rabbi Meir, according to Rabbi Meir. But Rabbi Yehuda Omer Chenvani kashulchani, a shopkeeper often needs money for change, and so according to Rabbi Yehuda, he's going to have the halacha of a money changer. And so if that money was left in a way where it would not be unreasonable for him to be able to use it, then if he uses it, and he's going to bear responsibility if it gets lost or stolen. Mishnah Yud Beis. If a shomer, if a guard misappropriates a lost object, how do we determine how much he is going to pay? So if a thief was to steal an item, and the item changes status, while it's in his possession, then we say that it's going to go by the time that it was stolen. So what's going to be the case for a shomer? So the Mishnah says, "Hasholeach yad b'pikadon." If you give something to someone to look after, and then they don't look after it properly, they misappropriate it. So Beis Shammai Omrim, he says, "Yilkeh b'chaser v'yaser." You're going to penalize him whether the value decreases, or even whether it increases. So it's the worst case scenario. He's going to always pay the greater amount. Says the Mishnah, Ubeis Hillel Omrim Kishas Hotzah. Beis Hillel say he's going to pay in accordance with the value of when he took it away from the owner and misappropriated it. And Rabbi Akiva Omer, Rabbi Akiva says Kishas Hatvia. Rabbi Akiva says it goes by the value of the item when the owner demanded it back. So even though the change in value has happened, nonetheless it gets determined by the time when the claim is made. If a person intends to misappropriate an item and people know that he was planning to do it, then the Mishnah says as follows: Beis Shammai Omrim Chayav. Beis Shammai say that he is going to be liable for any damages from that point and on. Beis Hillel Omrim Eino Chayav ad sheyishlach bo yad. Beis Hillel say he's only going to be liable if he ends up misappropriating it. Shneimar im lo shalach yado b'mleches reyehu, because the pasuk says that it has to be that he has misappropriated the neighbor's goods. Ketzad, so the Mishnah asks how this is so. Hitais achavis v'natal hemena revius. So if he was tilting a barrel to be able to take some of the contents out for his own use, and while he was doing so, the Mishnah says, "V'nishbara, it broke. Eino mishalem elo ravius." He's only going to pay for the amount that he misappropriated. Higbiha v'natal hemen ravius. If he lifted it up and took a ravius, a quarter log from it, v'nishbara, and then it got damaged, mishalem to make kula. Then he's going to pay the value of the entire barrel. And with that, we say Mazel Tov on completing chapter 3. How are we doing for time? Are we going to keep going?
You're cool. I'm okay.
All right, let's keep going. So Perek Daled, and we don't. I think I just need to take off my shoes. Need to be a bit more relaxed. Apologies for the brief intermission. Got to gear up for this one because I probably don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, Perek Daled, dealing with acquisitions and the method by which acquisitions are made, and what happens if people cheat on acquisitions. So, when it comes to movable items, so you've got to pay for movable items to be able to own them. But when you pay money for something, it doesn't halachically make it yours. So there's two parts to the process halachically. There's giving the money over to be able to buy something, but the ownership, the acquisition comes when the kinyan comes when you lift up the item, which is called hagba'ah, or when you pull the item, which is called mashicha or masira, or when the item is handed over to you. There's also another one called chalipin, which is where you exchange one item for another item, which excludes money. So, I give you my notes and you give me the keys to your Ferrari. I think it's a fair trade. So, once one of the items changes hand, the ownership of the other item is immediately transferred, even if it's not there at the same time. So we've got 4 different types of kinyan to bear in mind. We've got lifting, hagbar, we've got pulling, dragging, which is mashicha, we've got masira, which is handing over, we've got chalipin, which is an exchange of some sorts. Let's try and keep those things in mind as we tackle these Mishnahs. So, the Mishnah in Mishnah Aleph is dealing with currency, gold, silver, and copper. So as we said, handing over money does not transfer ownership. And not all money is money. Meaning, silver is money, but gold and copper have a halachic value as metaltalin, as property, which would mean that if you hand over those items, then the kinyan could be affected. And if you paid in gold or copper, then you would be doing a kinyan chalipin because you're exchanging something. So the Mishnah says as follows: Hazahav kone esa kesef. So Hazahav kone esa kesef means that by giving over gold, you would acquire the silver. But giving the silver over would not then mean that the chalipin is completed and the person would now own the zahav. You'd have to still take hold, lift up, drag, whatever it is, the gold. Putting copper into someone else's hand would affect a kinyan for silver. But kesef, silver, would not be sufficient to finalize the acquisition for copper. Ma'os haros, konos esayafos. So coins would decrease in value over time. So paying in old money, essentially, which has slightly become devalued, is going to acquire good money. V'hayafos einon konos esaros. But good money is not going to acquire the flawed money. Asimon, which is an unminted coin, has no imprint on it of any kind, no mint. Kona esamatbea, that can acquire a minted coin. Vahamatbea eina kona esasimo, but a minted coin is not going to be sufficient to affect the acquisition on unminted coins. Metaltalin kona esamatbea, movable property items are going to acquire a matbea, minted coin, v'hamatbea eina kona es metaltalin. But paying in minted coins is not going to affect the acquisition of the property until you've done a proper kinyan on it. Zaklal, this is the general rule, kol metaltalin kona zeh, that if it's property, then it can effect an acquisition. Otherwise, it's going to require additional forms of acquisition, like we said, lifting, dragging, or passing the items over. So
What
the
would
Mishnah.
you do if you, what would you do if you lived in a place where they had copper currency, like we do? You've got 1 pennies and 2 penny pieces, so they're made out of copper, or they were.
Good question. Learn the Gemara, I guess. I don't know.
Good answer.
Good answer. So Mishnah base, we say as follows: that once you've acquired halachically merchandise, then it's a binding arrangement. When you drag something, even if you haven't handed money over, you're going to be acquiring. And so if you've effected a kinyan but not yet paid the money, you're not going to be able to retract on this arrangement. So the Mishnah is going to now try and analyze for us at what point different acquisitions would be made. So the Mishnah says, Ketzat, how so? You've taken into your possession by dragging produce, but you haven't yet given money to the owner. You would not be able to retract on this. So I guess a modern day equivalent could be, once you take the item off the shelf, halachically you become responsible for it, and if it becomes damaged, then you're going to not just be able to say, oh well, I hadn't bought it yet, so it wasn't mine. But it could be that once you take an item off a shelf, halachically that's going to be yours, even if you've not paid money for it yet. You can't renege on the deal. But says the Mishnah, Nasan lo maos v'lo mashachem ela peres. If you've handed money over but haven't yet taken the items into your possession, yachol lachazor, you'd be able to renege on the deal. Aval amru. But the sages say, Misha para me'anshe dora mabul umidora plaga, the one who exacted payments from the generation of the flood and the generation of the Tower of Babel, who asid li para misha eno omed b'dibura. He is going to exact payment from whoever doesn't stand by their word. Meaning, even though you are allowed to renege on the deal at this point, there seems to be a bit of a curse. Or a bit of an assurance of divine retribution for someone who reneges on a deal. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kol kesef yado al ha'elyona. Rabbi Shimon says that if the money is in your possession, then you have the advantage. So if the buyer gave the money to the seller, only the seller could retract. But once the buyer has given, he can't retract. So as long as he hasn't yet handed over the money, then Rabbi Shimon says he could retract on the deal. Mishnah Gimel, and we're talking about ona'ah, which is basically ripping someone off, or cheating someone, or charging the wrong price, or paying the wrong price. So if a person is cheated by too much, then the buyer can demand the money back, and can give back the item. So how much do we need to be dealing with for this to be the case? So the Mishnah says, ha'ona, someone who gets exploited. Arba'a chesef me'esrim va'arba kesef l'sela. So the amount that has to have been overcharged or exploited on is arba kesef, 4 silver amounts, 4 silver ma'a, which so 4 out of 24 silver ma'a in a seller. So there's 24 ma'a in a seller, and if the value that you've been gypped is 4 out of 24, meaning a sixth, that is the threshold to be able to demand the money back. So if you've been charged a sixth more than the value of the item, then you could claim compensation. If it's less than that, then the transaction is valid, assuming that you've done the transaction. So says the Mishnah, Shasus lemekach. So it's a sixth of the transaction. Ad masai mutala hachazir. Until when is it going to be permitted for the buyer to return the item? Ad kadei shiyare letaga or lekrova. Until a period of time has lapsed that would allow you to show the merchandise to someone else, to another market expert, or to a relative. And if they were to tell you that you've been gypped, then you've got time still to go back. Hora Rabbi Tarfon Belod. Rabbi Tarfon ruled in Lod, Ha'ona Shmona Kesef Lasela, that the amount has to be 8 silver out of 24, which is a third of the value before Ona'ah could be claimed. Shlish Lemekach, says the Mishnah, a third of the transaction. So if you're overcharged by a third, then you could claim it back. The Samchu Tzigare Lod, and as a result of that, the merchants of Lod rejoiced, as it meant that they could overcharge by an additional amount before they could be at risk of being accused of exploiting. Amar lahem kol hayam mutar lahachazir, but Rabbi Tarfon said to them that the entire day is given as a time period to be able to take the item back. And so even though they could charge more, he gave more time to the buyer to be able to go back on the deal. Amrullah, they said to him, Yaniach lanu Rabbi Tarfon bimkomenu v'chazu l'divrei chachamim. So they said back to him, do you know what? We would rather that we have the threshold of a sixth, and we'll go by the rabbis when it comes to a sixth, and it comes to having less time to be able to claim. That's what the merchants of Lod wished upon themselves. Mishnah Dalet. It can also apply, Ona'ah can also apply for selling too little, charging a sixth less than the market price. So the seller could claim back if he realizes that he has drastically undersold. So the Mishnah says, Echad ha'lokeach ve'echad ha'mocher. Both the buyer and the seller, yesh lehen ona'ah, could be subject to the laws of exploitation, of ona'ah. T'shem she'ona'ah lehediot, kach ona'ah letaga. And just as the rules would apply to a layman, so too they would apply to a merchant. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, ein ona'ah letaga. Rabbi Yehuda says, the halacha doesn't apply to a professional. It should be his problem if he didn't know what the market price would be. Mi shehutal alav yado al ha'elyona. The one upon whom the exploitation has been imposed has the upper hand. Ratza omer tenli ma'osai, or tenli masha oniasi. And if he wishes, he could say, give me back my money and we'll cancel the deal. Or he can say, give me back the amount that you gained by exploiting me. So the law is always going to be on the side of the one who has suffered ona'ah. So I guess in a case of like, you sometimes find that someone's made an error on their website and they're selling an iPad for £1 instead of for 1,000 quid or something like that. So it could be there that the halacha would be on the side of the person who's undersold, because he has undersold for more than the sixth of the value of the item, and so he could have the ability to cancel the transaction, because otherwise there will be a violation on the buyer's part of onah. So there could be some really interesting ramifications to all of this. Mishnah Hay, and my battery is still doing okay. Brilliant. So Mishnah Hay, this is going to be a bit of a tongue twister. So we're going to be talking about paying with a deficient coin. Okay, so the seller's going to be out of hand, I guess, in this instance. Now, coins were valued by weight and by the image that it had. And there's a few different values that could be helpful to unpack, first of all. So there's a currency called a seller, and a seller is worth 4 dinar. A dinar is worth 6 ma'ah, and there's 24 ma'ah in a seller. So a dinar is worth 6 ma'ah, and 4 dinar is going to be worth a seller, and that's 24 ma'ah in a seller. A ma'ah is worth 2 pundion, and 12 dinars then are therefore worth 1 pundion, and therefore a seller is worth 48 pundion. Are you with me so far? Now, a pundion is worth 2 isarin, so a seller is worth 96 isarin, and a dinar is worth 24 isarin. Now that we're clear on that, let's have a look at Mishnah Hay. Kama tehei hasela chasera v'lo yeheva onah. How much could the seller be eroded and lose its value that it doesn't constitute onah? So Rabbi Meir says, Arba isarin. As long as it hasn't lost more than the value of 4 isarin, then it's still going to be legit. Arba isarin, isar ladina, for which is a rate of 1 pundion per dinar. So there's 24 isarin in a dinar, and so that's your sixth. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Arba pundionos, pundiona lidina. Rabbi Yehuda says, as long as it hasn't eroded to the value of 4 pindionos, the 1 pundion for each dinar, Rabbi Yehuda says you're going to be fine. So that's going to be a 12th of a dinar. And Rabbi Shimon says Shmona pundionos. It's going to be 8 pundionos, shnei pundionos ladina, which is the value of 2 pundionos per dinar, which is going to be a 6th of the dinar. Glad that was clear. Mishnah Vav. If the seller is ripped off, he has the money, but he can't value the merchandise, and therefore he is going to have longer in which to claim. And if he receives deficient coins, then he needs to go to a money changer to have them valued. So the Mishnah says, Ad masai muta lahachazir, how long does a person have to return a worn coin once he realizes that he's lost out? So the Mishnah says, Bekrachim, if he's in a big city, Ad kadei shiyare l'shulchani, so he's got enough time to be able to pop along to the money changer and have it examined. Uvakfarim ad arvei shabbasos. But in villages where you don't necessarily have money changers to hand, then you've got until Erev Shabbos to go back into the city, find a money changer, have it valued, and then go back and get the value that you require. Im hayam makira, if the buyer recognizes the coin once it's given back to him, then if it could be proven that the money came from this individual and the seller had been gypped, then you've got a whole year, or basically however long it takes to be able to go back and and get your money back. Ve'ein lo alav ela taromes, and he only has a grievance against him. Meaning, I haven't written. Meaning that the buyer should accept it back from him. V'nosna lemasa sheni ve'eno choshesh she'eno ela nefesh ra'ah. And you can give a slightly eroded coin for the sake of redeeming Ma'aser Sheni, and you don't have to be concerned that you're not giving the face value, She'eino ela nefesh ra'ah, because if you would accept a slightly eroded coin, then you'd be a bit miserly, because people do generally accept deficient value. So when you're dealing with Ma'aser Sheni, I guess you would have to be a little bit more easygoing with these things than you might otherwise want to be. Mishnah Zion. We're dealing with more halachas of set prices. So we've seen the ratio of a sixth when it comes to onah. Ha'onah arba kesef, that the measure for onah is 4 kesef, which is a sixth of the value. Batana shtei kesef, and the smallest amount that you could claim back in court is shtei kesef, 2 silver ma'a. V'hahoda'a shave pruta. And the smallest amount that you could admit to owing is the amount of a shave pruta. So basically, if Ruvain tells Shimon that he owes money and he admits to half the amount, so he pays half and then has to biblically take an oath on the rest of it. But in order to mandate that oath, there has to be a minimum of 2 ma'at being claimed and a shave pruta that is being confessed on. So that's what we're taught with regards to this. And now the Mishnah is going to deviate slightly and talk about chamesh prutos hen, talk about 5 halachic situations that the threshold is a shave pruta. And some of these might be familiar to you. So the Mishnah says, hahodah shave pruta. When it comes to a person agreeing to testify in court on an outstanding balance, that has to be the amount of at least a pruta, which isn't much. V'ha'isha miskadeshes b'shave pruta, and a woman gets betrothed with something that is the value of at least 1 pruta. V'hanehene b'shave pruta minahekdesh ma'al, and if someone benefits from items from the Beis Hamikdash, those items have to be worth at least a pruta. V'amotze shave pruta chayav l'hachriz, and one who finds an item, in order to be obligated to get that item returned and to announce it, it has to be worth a pruta. And a person who robs from somebody else and then is in a position where they have to swear an oath, that has to be worth a pruta as well. And then you can chase after them to get it back, even if they've run away miles and miles away. On that basis, then, says the Mishnah, Chamisha Chumshin Hein, there's going to be 5 halachic situations where 1/5 is going to get added to the principal amount. And these are they. Ha'ochel truma utrumas masa utrumas masa shel demai va'achala va'bikurim mosef chamish. If a person eats truma or trumas masa, or the truma of the 10th that gets given to the Levium, or trumas masa shel demai, or if it was an uncertain tithe and you eat the truma from that, v'achala, or you eat the portion that should have been given as chala, or you eat bikurim, so that when we pay back the value, you also have to add on another 5th on top of that. Va'poder neta ravai umasa sheni shalom mosif chomesh, a person who redeems his own fruit from something which is 4 years old, or from Masa Sheni, adds on a 5th to the value of the redemption. Apodes hekdesha mosif chamesh. If a person redeems his consecrated items, he pays back an additional 5th. Hanehene b'shave pruta min hekdesh mosif chamesh. If you benefit from temple property of something that is at least one pruta, then when you pay back the value, you have to add on a fifth. And when you steal from a person and you've reached the threshold of a shava pruta, and then you have to swear on the amount that you have stolen, and it was a false oath, then when you pay back, you're going to pay back an additional fifth as well. Whew. Mishnah test. We're going to be talking about things where ona'ah does not apply. So the Torah tells us that for ona'ah to apply, it has to be something that can be transferred from hand to hand, and therefore property is going to be excluded. And since property is excluded, we're going to see that an Eved Kanani is excluded, and IOU documents are going to be excluded. And let's see this inside. Elu dvarim she'ein lahem hona'ah. These are the matters that are not subject to the halachas of ona'ah. Avadim, slaves, vashtaros, documents, vakakaros, land, vahekdeshos, consecrated items. Ein lahem lo tashlumi chefel v'lo tashlumi arba v'chamisha. If they are stolen, they're not going to be subject to the double payment or to the payment of 4 or 5 times the value of the principal. Shomechinam eino nishba. An unpaid guard is not going to take an oath. But no so sachar eino mishalem, and a paid guard is not going to pay if items were stolen or lost. So if the paid guard wasn't negligent, then he's not going to have to pay. And if the unpaid guard has an item stolen or lost, as long as he hasn't had any role in what's happened, then he's not going to have to swear an oath. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kadoshim Shehu Chayav B'Charayosan Yesh Lain Onah. If it's Kodshim on which the person would have to bring another one if something happened to it, then Yesh Lahen Onah. Onah is going to apply. The She'enu Chayav B'Charayosan, and if it's something where he has no responsibility to replace them, Ein Lahen Onah, then the laws of Onah are not going to apply. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Afamocha Sefer Torah, even a person who sells a Torah scroll, Behema Umargalis, or if they sell an animal or a pearl, Ein Lahem Onah, then Onah is not going to apply to these things, as there is no, market value. There is no fixed price to these kinds of things. Amru lo amru ela es elu. So Rabbi Yehuda says anything where the buyer has an agenda and would pay any price, then there's not going to be any onah. And the Chachamim say back that it's only these items which are going to be on the list for onah. Mishnah Yud. We're going to conclude the halachas of onah over here. And we're going to say as follows: in the same way, just as there is a prohibition of onah when it comes to commerce, buying and selling, kach onah with varim. There's also a problem of onah when it comes to the words that we use. So lo yomar lo bekama chefet zeh. You should not say to a seller, how much are you selling this for who eino rotze likach, if you do not wish to purchase it at all. So there's ona'ah when it comes to wasting people's time or leading people into thinking that they're going to be doing a deal when you have no intention of doing so. Imhaya bal teshuvah, and if the person wishes to repent from this, lo yomar lo zechol ma'asecha harishonim. You should not remind a bal teshuvah. This is where it comes in, guys. You should not remind a bal teshuvah of their earlier actions. Imhu ben geirim, if they are children of converts, lo yomar lo zechol ma'aseh avosecha, then you should not violate ona'as devarim by aggrieving people, exploiting people, by reminding them of their father's actions. As the pasuk says in Shemos chapter 22 verse 20, and you should not mistreat nor shall you oppress a convert. So that is where Onas Devarim comes into it. And amazing that it's included in the Mishnah over here in Bava Metziah. Whew, 2 more Mishnahs to go, guys. It's a long one tonight, and I think I've still got battery. Not much though. Here we go. Let's try and.
So what happens if you want to know how much an item is being sold for and it's not priced?
If you are in the market to buy one, then fine. But if you're just kind of going into a guy's shop and just annoying him by asking how much everything's worth, but you have no intention of buying the item, then that would be a nice devarim, it would seem. So, if you walked into, maybe not you, but if I walked into a ridiculously expensive shop, starting price £10,000, and I'm just inquiring as to how much everything costs. I walk into the Aston Martin showroom, and I'm wasting the guy's time so I can sit inside the car and see how it all works, and feel like I've got an Aston Martin for a couple of minutes. That could be Onas Devarim, because I'm just wasting the guy's time with misleading him into conversations that have no positive outcome for him. Hope that helps. Here we go. 2 more Mishnahs to go, as long as the battery holds out. So still talking about misleading, but not in the same domain as Onah anymore. So it's similar, and we're still dealing with misleading. So Ein Ma'arvin Peros Beperos. When you've made a deal on a certain batch of produce, you can't now go and mix the produce around with other produce, afilu chadashim b'chadashim, even if you're intermingling new produce with new produce, for ein sarich lomar chadashim bishanim, and there's no need to say, needless to say, that you can't mix new produce with old produce. Be'emes, in truth, beyayin hetiru la'arev kasha barach. In truth, you'd be allowed to mix strong wine with weak wine, because you are improving it. Mish and this arev mayim b'yena. I just missed a bit. Ein ma'arvin. There you go. Ein ma'arvin shimrei yayin b'yayin. You cannot mix the sediment of one wine with the wine. Aval nosein lo es shmarav. But you could give the buyer wine with its sediment. So when you sell wine from a barrel, it's assumed that there's also going to be some sediment, but you can't mix the sediment into what you are selling, even if you're going to give the same ratio of sedimented wine. So you can't mix sediment in, but if sediment comes with it, then you can sell it with the wine. Mishan is arev mayim b'yena, a person who mixes in water to the wine, loyim karenu b'chanas elohim kain hodia, then you can't sell it unless you inform the people that they are buying wine which has had some dilution from water. V'lolataka afa pishada, and you can't sell it to a merchant at all, even if you inform him of it. Because it's just deceiving him, because the merchant is going to sell it on and potentially deceive the next purchaser into thinking that he's getting 100% wine when he's not. He's getting diluted wine, and the merchant isn't necessarily going to tell the next customer. But if it's in a place where people are accustomed to place wine into the water into the wine to dilute it, and everyone's aware that the merchant might have done this, then it would be okay to sell that to a merchant as well. And finally, Mishnah Yud Beis. Hatagar notel mechamesh guranos v'nosen letoch megura achas. A merchant is allowed to take grain from 5 threshing floors belonging to different people and place the produce in one place, as long as he is not intentionally mixing it with inferior quality. And mechamesh gitos v'nosen letoch pitam echad, and can take from 5 wine presses and put it into one large cask, as long as you're not intending to mix low quality with high quality and then try and pass it off. Rabbi Yehuda Omer lo yichalek hachen v'niklayos ve'gozen latinokos. a shopkeeper should not hand out treats to children, toasted grain and nuts, back in the day when those were the best treats you could get. So shopkeepers should not hand these things out to children, because they are going to become accustomed to coming to him, and that could come at the expense of competing shopkeepers, it would seem. And so it's not fair to drive up your competition in that way. But Chachamim matirim. But Chachamim are matir, as they permit doing so. V'lo yifchos es hashar. You cannot sell below market value, which is interesting. That's predatory pricing. So the Mishnah says you should not engage in predatory pricing. V'chachamim omrim zachur latov. But the Rabbanim say that if he wishes to do so, he should be remembered positively. Lo yavo es agrisim. So you should not sift ground beans to remove the waste. What does this mean? So beans would normally be sold with shells on, and by taking the shells off the beans, you would make them look nicer, and so you would raise the price because they're looking better than they actually are. So I guess this would be artificially enhancing your product to be able to sell it for more. And that is a problem, Divrei Abashur, according to Abashur. But Chachamim Matir, the Chachamim are matter this because people are getting what they see, which is clean beans. But the Chachamim agree that you should not make the ones nearer the top look nice, and then She'eno Ela Kagon Evesayin, because this is misleading people, and this is stealing based on false impressions and false assumptions. So, rearranging the best produce at the top and then leaving all the schmutz at the bottom, that would be a problem, even according to the Chachamim. Ein mefarkasin lo es ha'adam v'lo es ha'behema v'lo es ha'kelim. And finally, the Mishnah says one should not adorn a person before selling him on the slave market, or an animal or vessels. You should basically not try and deceive with the things that you are trying to sell. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we say Mazel Tov on completing chapter 4 of Maseches Bava Metziah. And in Yitzhak Hashem, we might not be on next week, but possibly the week after that, we'll be back on with chapters 5 and chapter 6, please God. And in the meantime, I wish you a wonderful and meaningful evening.
Well done. Thank you.